So thank you for coming this morning. I was out there having coffee and listening to different people, and the way this workshop has been presented, people were expecting me to talk. So I never disappoint anybody who wants to hear me talk. But I'm not the primary one to do the presentation. But I did want to say to all of you that what we are doing in this session and with the other two that will follow is that we will be looking at the proposal for our reorganization of parishes in the diocese. So this is the point at which all of those grand visions come into the nitty-gritty and the concrete expression. So what I want to simply say to you is that today's session in this workshop and the following ones is still part of the consultation that I am going through to be able to come together with a plan that will be outlined and presented and sort of made official on January 1st, 2019. We've been working towards this for some time. And so you have been given, I hope, this document. It hasn't been given out yet? Okay, it will be given out. This is the document that presents the proposal and the various parts and dimensions of that proposal. It's going to be handed out so that you can work with it, and we will receive from you comments, reactions, and so forth. And at some point in this exercise, you're going to be given some paper, pens, and we're going to ask you to give us more feedback as we go along. So the theme of this particular session is new parishes stronger together. What does this mean? How does it impact where you're presently worshiping and assembling and the parishes that you're in? John is going to be the one that will present what the different parts of this is about. We're going to give you a chance to talk to each other and respond back. I will hear what some of those points and questions are, and at the end of our session, I will try to comment back on what I've heard. So does that make some kind of sense? We're okay with that? So, John, please come and help us along.
Thank you, Bishop. So we're just passing out the document here, so we'll just give that a second to filter through the room. My name is John Stevens. You see on there that in the workshop thing it says Archbishop and diocesan staff. I'm staff, I guess. It was originally supposed to be a number of us. Deacon Bob Britton, our chancellor, who's been involved in this. Unfortunately, he became ill and couldn't be with us today. And then our financial guy is leaving the organization. So as the lowest man on the totem pole, what did they say about things that roll downhill? Here I am. So we're going to work through it. Our 3 sessions today are going to basically walk through this proposal that's being passed out. That's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to give an overview of the whole document from beginning to end. Then in this session, we'll dive specifically into the parish proposals. In session 2, which I think is actually the most important session, we'll talk, and really a lot about what Sherry was talking about in the keynote, the actual activity and leadership of these proposed parishes and how that works and what that looks like. And then in session 3, we'll talk about the last part of this document that I'm passing out about transition, and we'll dive deep and get your questions and feedback on this. It is, in fact, a workshop, so it really is about a quick presentation to you an opportunity, that's what the yellow sheets are for, to hear back from you, both individually and collectively, and respond to that. The bishop said consultation, and he meant it. And so it's important that we keep that in mind too as we go through today. So I'll present a bit, we'll get the feedback and discussion going, and the bishop will have some closing comments. And that's how we'll structure each workshop today. So does that make sense? We're good? Okay. Has anyone not heard yet that we have a pastoral plan called Equip the Saints? I mean, it's possible. Communication is not a strong suit in a church as large as ours with so many different locations and so many people involved. But last year, we launched Equip the Saints, a pastoral plan that tries for 3 years to try and renew our diocese and become a more missionary church. I think we saw it in our presentation this morning from Sherry. We want to be parishes that bear fruit, right? Or don't you? Oh, okay, you do. Okay, good. So if we don't agree on that, the rest of the presentation is not going to make a lot of sense, okay? But if we agree on that, then the plan is a way to get us there from our current, present reality. I think, you know, we're above average. We're not as bad as the American parishes that Sherry was talking about, right? We're better, maybe. But, you know, we do have work to do. And so the plan really just talks about 4 really key areas of focus on fostering communities that form missionary disciples. That's what we were talking about this morning in the keynote. Providing resources to carry out that mission in the world. So we're looking specifically at, and this whole assembly is part of that. When we have a workshop happening on discipleship, on leadership, on reaching young people, on care for the sick and dying. That's all about that red dot, the stuff that we need to do. The green piece of the pie and the blue piece of the pie are a little bit what we're talking about today. Leadership and our structure. Because all of those things support what we're trying to do in terms of changing our culture, right? And so we presented all that in the pastoral plan. You can download it from the Archdiocesan website. You can watch videos on it. There's all kinds of things you can do. And you can see that we outline very specific goals inside of that pastoral plan to be able to get the change in culture that we're trying to get. And one of those things announced last year is reorganization of parishes. And we're going to dive into that in this workshop. But as you can see, every other workshop here this weekend is about one of those other aspects of the plan. So we're trying to move it all forward together. So let's just dive into this proposal, New Parishes Stronger Together. This is the action plan that represents, remember that blue bar I just showed you, the reorganization of parishes. These are the concrete steps that we're proposing we need to take in order to get to where we want to go. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, why do we need to do this part, right? Can't we just do more discipleship? Can't we just do more evangelization where we are and so on and so forth? I guess the first question is, who can actually do more right now in their parish, you know? But let's look at the why in a real, like, or not at all. Whoop. There. Let's look at the why in a real matter-of-fact kind of way, okay? So we agree on fruit, right? Sherry made that pretty abundantly clear, that fruit is the goal, that we want to create missionary disciples who create fruit. In the Equip the Saints plan that's out there, you know, we talk about the mission of the church is to foster dynamic parish communities who equip the saints for carrying out the mission of Christ in the world. We want to create fruit, right? So we need tools to do that. And we need strategies to be able to do that. And that's what all the other workshops are here about the different opportunities for forming disciples that Sherry's talking about in the next room. We're talking about ministry of care and companionship and youth and all those different things. But a lot of that hangs on our culture. Remember that average culture that Sherry talked about in her presentation? Have you ever heard this? I heard this before. I'm not a convert. I was born Catholic, but eventually I get excited about my faith. And there was always this thing that people said about converts in my church, which was, they'll calm down eventually. You know, and they don't, thanks be to God. But I always found that really depressing. You know, I found that depressing because that meant their excitement and their enthusiasm for the gospel and for Jesus and the life-changing encounter that they had, eventually the parish culture would be enough to, you know, rein them in and stamp them down. And so that's not the case in your parish, obviously. We're talking about parishes in other places in the world. But what is the average culture of our parish? And that is what we're working to change through these concrete initiatives and actions. In order to change culture, it has to be supported by leadership. Remember Sherry said that this only happens in a highly supportive environment, right? We're trying to build with the restructure and the leadership structure and a number of the other changes that we're proposing, a highly supportive environment in every parish. And so you can see that we have to tackle the question of leadership, and the whole thing hinges on structure. Structure, changing it by itself is not really that big of a thing. It's not going to accomplish a whole heck of a lot unless we're really worried about these other things. But it can really weigh down the progress on some of those other things. And that's why it's necessary. And it's kind of something we realized. Whoop. Oh my goodness. Seem to be missing a slide. It's just kind of something we realized as we went along. So the whole structural change piece supports and helps create that environment that supports all these other things. Supports great leadership, supports a parish culture that's about bearing fruit and making discipleship, supports the strategy that we're trying to accomplish and the tools that we're trying to use to bear fruit for the kingdom. Structure is part of the problem, part of the answer, but it's not the only part. So in this proposal that you have before you, we're just trying to say it accomplishes some clear and direct goals from the Equip the Saints pastoral plan, and they're outlined in there. And one of those goals is structural. So let's look at the proposed parishes. You're already there probably on page 4. So these proposed groups of parishes that eventually will become one parish, and we'll talk about that for a second. We're arrived at 18 parishes plus the cathedral. Regional proposals. So a lot of regions got together, they talked through this, they said, what do we think could work, what do we don't think could work? If you watched the Archbishop's Lenten series last year, you got a sense of the vision and what we're looking for these things. And these proposals came in. We had feedback from the Lenten series, and we processed that. We had over 400 pieces of feedback that we put into the decision-making process when we were looking at that. We looked at geography, we looked at civil boundaries, we looked at the feedback from the clergy. We met with the priests and deacons for 2 days, 2 weeks ago, and we got their feedback and have made some adjustments from that. And now we're going to use feedback from you today to be able to inform this process even further. On the other pages, past the proposed parishes, we're talking about all the stuff that Sherry was talking about, all the things we need to be doing to be able to accomplish and bear this fruit that she was speaking about. The areas of mission, community, and formation that form us and do help us to achieve these activities. So that's what's in the middle part of the section, and that's what we're going to be talking about in workshop 2. One more. And then we're going to talk about in workshop 2 also the leadership structure, the way these new parishes are led, the way we'll appoint hopefully priests, how leadership teams will come around the priests and deacons, how parish councils and finance councils will work together, all towards moving that leadership part of the pyramid that I spoke about, and we'll look at those in session 2. And then we'll talk about in session 3 the transition process, the way that local clergy who are on the ground now will work together to form transition teams in the parish groupings, how they'll be supported by the diocese, and how we'll phase in some of the changes that we're proposing. So we want to dive deep into all of those things, and that's why we're taking 3 continuous workshops as opposed to making one really broad overview workshop 3 times. So that's the way that we're going to do it. So let's talk about the proposed parishes themselves, because that's where we want to zero in on this, and I was only supposed to take the first 20 minutes to get there. So I think it's first important to really dial back and say, what is a parish? So when you see those groupings there, you might be imagining a number of different things. You might be imagining one church, and how will I drive that far? Or you might be imagining, how is this going to work? Or we're all going to lose our identity or something like that. So the first thing to remember is a parish, in the strict structural definition that we're dealing with here, in the Code of Canon Law, is a territory or a division of the diocese. The whole church is the divisions of smaller locales, right? There's the universal church, which is carved up into dioceses that are overseen by bishops, and dioceses are carved up into parishes, which are overseen by priests. So parish is a territory existing to serve all the people within that territory, both the baptized and the unbaptized that we're called to reach in those territories. They're usually served by a pastor, and that's a technical term at the bottom there, a unique juridical person. That means they're separate, in the eyes of the church, kind of a separate organization. And so they're a unit, you know. So when we look at that, I think we understand that in some ways when we think about, we have municipalities. Who's from HRM? Right? But I live in Eastern Passage, right? Even though I'm part of HRM. So, you know, there's a territory that we belong to, that we're a part of organizationally, but inside of that we have our own communities. And so the parish we have to think about territorially, and then we have to think about the church. What is a church? And I'm talking, again, strictly in the structural definition. Obviously, the theological definition of the church is all of us together, called to our vocation to holiness and mission. But a church building is a sacred building designated for divine worship. A parish could have many churches, not just one. And the name of the church can never usually be changed. There are always exceptions to everything, so it can never usually be changed. So when we're talking about a proposed parish and you see groupings there, we're talking about one canonical parish, one organizational unit, one territory, with multiple churches. So we're not calling at this point or at all for building closures. The pastoral care and ministries of that parish, the real work that we're trying to do to bear fruit, are done in collaboration with one another. That the human and financial resources will be shared so that we have enough capacity to be able to do the things we need to do to change the culture. It's led by clergy and lay people using their gifts and strengths. Remember Sherry talked about those charisms that can change the world? Using their gifts and strengths in a spirit of co-responsibility and mutuality. Remember what Sherry said about missionary disciples? Share the responsibility for the mission of the church. This is how we want everyone, hoping everyone will act together. So when you see those listing of 18 parishes plus the cathedral in there, you see multiple sites within them. It's one territory, multiple churches, shared ministry, shared human and financial resources, led in co-responsibility. That's kind of the, I guess, the model that we're going for when we talk about these parishes. So if you're like me and you grew up Catholic, you use the word parish and church interchangeably, right? Like you say, I go to my parish and I mean I'm going down the street to my church. But sometimes I go to my parish and I mean, you know, I'm talking about the whole community. And so we sometimes get them interchanged. So just for the purposes of this presentation, we're using those strict structural definitions because we're talking about structure. There are more definitions that we can work with as we go along, but because we're talking about structure, we'll look at those. So that's what it means when it says proposed parishes there. And so the proposed parishes that you see in your booklets, arrived at by the process that I described, by regional presentation, feedback from the regions, proposals from the regions. That's probably about where 80% of that structure came from, was the regional proposals. Then there were places where the regional proposals maybe were absent or overlapped or weren't, maybe didn't agree with one another, or you know, on the edges of regions, maybe there was some give and take, and so we looked at municipal boundaries, and we looked at civil boundaries, we looked at what's happening traditionally, we looked at the feedback we got from our priests and deacons a couple weeks ago, and that's how we landed on these 18 locations. Proposed units, I guess you could say at this point. That's the parishes, that's the structure, and I think hopefully inside of that, what it gives us the capacity to do is have the people we need and the resources we need to become parishes that bear fruit and change the culture, like Sherry talked about in her presentation. So because we were a bit late starting and because we had a bit of a brief introduction as well, I'm a little over time on the 20 minutes I was supposed to take to overview and present. So what you have in your hands is a yellow sheet of paper. Or a dandelion, as I found out when I printed it at the office the other day. So there's kind of two parts. We're looking at the overall proposal, which I went through really fast in order to catch up time. And we're saying, you know, what are this proposal? How does it help us accomplish this mission? How does it help us bear fruit? We're looking at maybe some weaknesses or hang-ups of this proposal that might hamper our mission, that might impact our ability to bear fruit. When you look at the parish groupings, do you have any recommendations? What do you think? Do you have any questions? Do you have any alternate ideas or changes? And do you have any other recommendations to make to the Archbishop? So what we'll probably do, now that you have your yellow sheets of paper, maybe we're supposed to take 30 minutes to do this part. What time does the session get over, 11:30? Yeah, so maybe we'll just take about 15, 20 minutes to do this part, and we'll get the bishop on at the end so we can hear some of your feedback from the floor. So in your pews around, well, they're not pews, sorry. In your seats, comfortable theater-style seats around you, maybe you can get together with 2 or 3 people, go through those questions, have a conversation. We do want to collect from everybody here one of these sheets so that everybody has a chance to be heard, and we'll go through them and read them and put them all together into one piece of feedback. And we'll follow up if we have any questions. So please put your name and email address on them. My personal policy on anonymous stuff is it's really hard to deal with it because it's anonymous. So if we know who it's from, we can follow up, we can answer your questions, and so on and so forth. And then we'll hear from you, maybe from your group. Somebody can give a little bit of a report about what your conversation was like. We can hear that, receive that. The bishop can give a little bit of a response, and we'll go from there. And we'll continue the conversation as the day goes forward. Okay, does that make sense?
Well, thank you very much for the comments that I heard. What I was also observing was the fact that in spite of the very inappropriate environment in which to kind of gather for conversation and to maybe answer some questions, in spite of that, I was hearing people very much engaged in the conversation. And I noticed people walking from one part of the room to the other part of the room because on your own, you got together maybe with the ones from your parish or the ones who might be affected by what we're proposing. So I think that shows, at least from this gathering, that there is a desire to go forward. And I thank you for that. I want to address what I heard. Don't walk away from the timelines is one of the messages. And I want to say that we're not walking away from the timelines, but also keep in mind that the timelines that we're working with are points of first or second departures. It's not, January 1st doesn't mean that everything is going to magically be transformed. January 1st is when we will be presenting the plan. Right now it's a proposal, but on January 1st, it'll be a plan. And then we have another year to put the plan into operation. We'll talk about that later today when we talk about transition. And so for those of you who are ready to go, get going. Get going. Talk to people from those other communities that are going to be brought together. Don't wait for something to magically occur. Talk to the people who are involved in those other communities that will be merged into a new parish. That's going to be part of the challenge of the next little while. But start now. And perhaps you can keep in mind that between now and Advent, not a long time, but maybe by the time we get to Advent and get through Advent, maybe some new birthing will come into being. That will probably cause some turmoil and some pain in that process of change from what I've heard from the last person who intervened. And you're absolutely right. People do not like change. But all of us here are aware that we're changing every second, every minute, every hour, and every day, whether we like it or not. And what do we do when we are not feeling all that great? We go see a doctor, and he gives us something, and it helps us to move on for another day. This is part of what we are trying to do, to make us a little bit healthier, to be able to do the great things that we have within us the capacity to do. So, yes, people do not like change. I like the suggestion that came up from one of you who said, some parishes have already been through this. You said it from St. Ambrose. There are other people that have gone through mergers and so on. The temptation is to think that if we've gone through it before, we're now all set and we don't have to do it again. The fact is that if you've gone through it before, you've learned some things, and because you've got the wisdom and the experience, you can actually bring that to the table for those who may not have been through some of that before. So I like that suggestion of pulling together the people that have been through mergers of parishes. But you know, there are people in your parishes who have been through mergers in other institutions, whether it's hospitals or whether it's schools or whether those people also have experience and wisdom. Draw on them, particularly when we ask that you create a transitional team. That's going to be part of the conversation as well later today. Pour la paroisse francophone, eh bien, on va faire tout ce qu'on peut pour assurer qu'on va maintenir l'identité locale. Donc, c'est important. On vous a rassuré déjà qu'on va tout faire pour bien vous accueillir et pour assurer que vous allez continuer de vous rassembler dans la langue qui est la vôtre. If you didn't understand that, well, it picks up what was already said. In that particular unit, the people that are there have already indicated their commitment to support the uniqueness of those who gather and worship in the French language. We want to pull together the strengths that are there, and that, whether it's French language, is a gift. If it's people that are coming to us from other cultures, that is also a gift. Our church is multicultural. You got an Italian bishop, for God's sake. Right? And thank you for the support from those who have been through some of this and who can bring to the table the conviction that it works. When you pull your strengths together, great things can happen. It works. Bring that to the table. That's really important. Thank you very much. Let's go have lunch.